from God's Unchanging Word Studios in New Orleans, we are pleased to bring you news, nuggets, and insights with today's host, Tom Carey.
Well, greetings, everyone, and welcome to God's Unchanging Word in another edition for our news, nuggets, and insights. Today is Friday, December 27th, 2019, our last program for the teens. Next week, we come into the 20s. Decade for Christ's return? Well, I don't know. Well, that's what we're talking about on God's Unchanging Word, so let's begin right away. We're going to talk about the hypocrisy of disrespecting the American flag. It's got a really interesting story here. It's kind of sad when you think about it. We'll talk about that when we get started. The change culture of our nation, the changing culture. We began last week when we talked about the Pope, so we're going to talk about it and continue in that vein today. We Three Kings, remember the song? I know Christmas is past, but the song We Three Kings in the Magi, it's got an interesting turn. I received a phone call that I didn't understand in one of the programs we did. I'm going to share with you today some deeper insights. So let's begin. Let's start with from our short stories first. This is from our department from You Just Can't Make This Up. This is really, really interesting. Transgender. I try to bring some of these stories with a straight face, and it's really tough. This is one that you never dreamed can happen. Transgendering brings new problems, as you can imagine. The ACLU calls for tampons in the men's rooms in order to achieve menstrual equality. Can't make this up. They're actually going to begin lawsuits if they don't put these whatever in men's bathrooms. Well, you know, until now, you never needed them in a men's bathroom. While free menstrual products are not uniformly provided in women's restrooms, they are almost never available in men's restrooms. Did you ever wonder why? If you went back to the beginning, God created them male and female. Well, they're not available in men's room even for pay, the group said in a statement on Tuesday. Well, there you have it. What can I say? By the way, no pictures this time. No pictures. This was sent to me and I had to use it because this is just about as bizarre as you can get. But no, it will get more bizarre as we go. All right, now let's take a look at something a little more serious. Warren Buffett, the billion-dollar king of abortion. For those who don't know who Warren Buffett is, he's one of the gurus in the internet and in business and has made billions upon billions and billions of dollars over the past 40 or 50 years. So this is something that he's using as philanthropy for the billion-dollar king of abortion. Buffett donated $1.23 billion, billion with a B, to the abortion groups worldwide from 2001 to 2012. So I didn't understand this. I did not know this, but these groups, including Planned Parenthood, NORAL, and the Population Council, that either campaign for pro-abortion legislation, perform abortions themselves, or have helped develop the controversial abortion drug RU-486. $289 million went to Planned Parenthood, including about $500 million the United States used to use of your tax money to help fund the killing of babies. I thought this was pretty sad. I wanted to bring this out to everybody to show you. So he gave this $1.2 billion, putting this in perspective, that Buffett gave to the organization was enough to pay for 2.7 million babies in the womb, according to the Pro-Abortion Institute. 2.7 million babies killed through the help of what was being given to them from Warren Buffett. I just wanted to slow that down for a second to try to let that sink in. You know, God's going to come back and he's going to put this back to where things need to be, and that's going to stop. It really is going to stop. Weather out of whack. Well, I've got a surprise today. We're going to have a guest who's going to bring us a little story. I'm going to lead into our guest. We'll talk about that in a second. It's Chuck Hunt Jr., who's in town from Michigan. He is one of our ministers. He and his family are visiting. We've been going over a lot of things for the work in the future and for God's Unchanging Word. This year, we're hoping to have Chuck, along with some others, who are going to be beginning to Skype in and bring us reports. And today he's bringing us a little bit about the weather and climate, which is one of the things that is near and dear to his heart. So while he was in town, I said, well, listen, would you mind taking a session for us while you're here? So now he's going to be talking about the weather, so let's lead into Chuck. So weather around the globe. So early winter storms plummet the northeast. That is this past weekend, talking about all the snow. But this around the globe is going on too. In Europe, they had early winter snows that arrived in Europe, and they have declared an emergency in Venice. Now, if you're looking at that screen, if you leave it up, Jeff, leave it up. Look at that picture there. That water, that's not a lake. That's in the area that's in the middle of these buildings that is normally filled with tourists. But because of the high winds and the rains that they were having over there, it blew all the water into, and it was flooding parts of the city in Venice. They're already built upon the rivers all through the city, but I said, when I first looked at that, I said, wow, this is pretty impacting how much water is rising in that one particular city. Australia, so now this brings us down to Australia. So we always concentrate on what's going on in America, but Australia is having a problem of a different sort. So we have Chuck Hunt now. I'm going to turn it over to him to tell us a little bit about what's going on down in Australia. So Chuck, why don't you bring us what you have, and welcome to God's Unchanging Word.
Well, thank you, Tom. Two major issues going on in Australia right now is the high temperatures that are affecting that continent. And because of those things, there's also catastrophic fire danger happening. Human-caused global warming is being blamed for record high temperatures and the higher than normal brush fires in Australia. Previous record of 104 degrees Fahrenheit back in 2013 has been smashed by 105 degree temperatures up to 118 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. The map here that you see shows many fires that are happening throughout the continent of Australia and the lands that are around Australia. This satellite picture shows the eastern side of Australia and the fires and the smoke that is rising from these fires. Officials are so concerned that they're getting the hospitals ready for the young and the elderly and those with preconditions such as asthma and emphysema. They're ready for an onslaught of people coming in because of medical conditions. This is a natural occurring weather pattern. So Australia is not foreign to hot weather and brush fires, but the officials are stating that because of climate change, this has enhanced the weather conditions, so it's prolonged. It started earlier in September, and now it's being prolonged into January. And you can see here that the fire and the wildlife are being affected by these brush fires. Homes, farmland, and habitats are being consumed on a daily basis, with the natural habitats and the animals being affected, farmers losing their fields. And also, these pictures, it looks like a cloud of fire coming upon them. A sheep farm being wiped out by fire. One of the other biggest concerns in Australia is the officials are stating on record that they don't have the human power, the manpower to contain these fires. They are so worried that it's going to go so far and so long that everything will be devastated, and they see no hope in sight. They are actually saying to the people, prepare yourselves, because it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. When you look at these pictures and you see these fires happening to Australia, you can think of, as we've mentioned before, in California, in this country, it's happening around the world. And these things bring forth biblical scripture that God says. This is another picture that shows a fire in Australia and how bright and how destructive it can be. And Ezekiel 15, 7 through 8 says, I will set my face against them. Although they have come out of the fire will yet consume them. And when I set my face against them, you will know that I am the Lord. I will make the land desolate because they have been unfaithful, declares the sovereign Lord. So what we're looking at here is a promise from God. It's a warning from God that disobedience will bring upon these disasters. What we can do is continue to pray and ask that our Father in heaven send His Son quickly to take care of these issues, these catastrophes that are happening. And we can pray for the people in Australia as we've been praying for those in California in regards to these fires. There is an answer. There is hope, and the hope is in God and His Son, Jesus Christ, coming back to this earth. So that's the story from Australia. So back to you, Tom.
Well, thanks a lot, Chuck. We appreciate you being here and sharing that with us. When we began discussing bringing in presenters and bringing in from Skyping from around the country, we asked Chuck to participate and be a part of that program and that expanse for God's Unchanged Your Word. So I asked him, said, Chuck, what do you really like? What is your hobbies, your interests that you focus on? And he said, well, actually, weather is one of his things he really loves. And that was an area that we needed for God's Unchanging Word, because when you talk to the world wants to blame everything that happens on just natural climate change on how we live. When God's Word tells us that these events that they say is just man-made could actually be calamities of retribution from God. So he's going to help be able to bring us to dissect what the world teaches, what's going on in the weather, and bring us God's Word along those same lines. So we're looking forward to the year ahead. All righty then. Chuck, thanks a lot for being here. So let's go on now. Hypocrisy and the disrespect to the American flag. What began as in the news as kneeling down has actually been going on with much deeper ramifications over the past decades and growing of disrespect to the American flag. The most prevalent is that of burning the American flag. And they do it almost every protest in the United States. They will burn the American flag. All across America, it's commonly burned at universities, at rallies that are against the United States. And no one ever gets charged, and there's nothing ever brought out against what this is considered, in my opinion, is a hate crime against America, right? So I'm laying this foundation for a reason. I want to bring you a story. This story is this, and this is true, this is a literal true story, that a man has been sentenced to 16 years in prison for burning an LGBTQ flag. And I'm not making this up. The hypocritical injustice, colors of the flag determine the punishment after a man is sentenced to 16 years for burning the LGBTQ flag. So now let me to be fair and honest in the story. What he did was he literally stole the flag and he burnt it. He took it off of a church building, tore it down, and he burnt it. So literally, that is illegal. You cannot do that. A flag, it's a misdemeanor in most counties, but this man was given 16 years. Why? Because they tacked on a number of charges, including, they say this was repetitious issues that he has, and they added on hate crime. Hate crime. So let's go through this story here, just briefly to tell you what actually happened. The I man was sentenced to 16 years, as we said. He was arrested after stealing a pride banner hanging at the Ames United Church of Christ and burning it on June 11th outside. He stole it, and then he went to a gentleman's club to burn it. So, I mean, there's a lot behind this story that's bizarre, and you can understand, well, this is certainly illegal. But now, think about this, 16 years, all right, that this happened. Adolfo Martinez, 30, of Ames, was found guilty last month of third-degree arson in violation of individual rights, which is a hate crime, is what they're saying. Third-degree harassment. I'm not a law enforcement officer, but I never heard of that kind of stuff. Third-degree arson? I mean, harassment? I never heard of that. I mean, I've heard of harassment. Reckless use of fire as a habitual offender. Reckless use of fire? I mean, I've never heard of these charges before. I mean, reckless use of fire as a habitual offender? It's like you've been using fire and you're reckless with it. Did you catch somebody's house on fire? Did somebody's clothes burn up because of what you did? How do you get reckless use of fire? Unbelievable what took place there. This is a report from Jim Neff. He's a police, I think he's retired, and he was a chief in the police department for a number of years. And this is what he wrote. He said, it's shameful that we have chosen to protect criminal actions when the colors of the flag are red, white, and blue. In other words, they can burn the American flag if it's red, white, and blue. It doesn't matter, all right? It doesn't matter. While issuing draconian justice when the colors of the rainbow are involved. He goes on. So this is an un-American, and it's the slippery slope that we're all sliding down. This is a frightening disconnect in our system, and it's hypocritical. All right, this is a law enforcement, the Jim Neff, police commander. He's retired. I brought that up from his report, and he gives a very honest, detailed report, and he understands that the man broke the law and he needed to pay a price for breaking the law. But as he said, this is draconian. Now, 16 years, and you add on hate crime, and because it's the third time you were charged with this type of arrest, whether you burned a flag or not, we don't know. They're not told us. But how many times are people arrested at protest? And they'll go from one city to another city because they're paid to go out and protest. And they'll be arrested and picked up and they're released immediately. All right? So what he's trying to say is this slippery slope that's going down is only going to continue to get worse, right? So now, I brought this report. I found this. This is from The Sun. This is I guess you would call it a ragtag newspaper out of Great Britain. But they did a research on the study, and this is what they found. In the report by The Sun, a newspaper in Great Britain, reported the story, said that the 16 years given is compared to, and this is what blew me away, is that this is the average sentence given to rapists in America. Can you imagine that? 16 years, the average sentence given to a rapist who's just destroyed someone's life, and he gets the same sentence for burning the gay flag. Had it been an American flag, probably would have given him a slap on the wrist, sent him down the road. So this is what we're up against. Now, I'm bringing these stories for a reason. We've been covering this because the climate in America is continuing to change. The culture of who we are and what we believe is evolving so fast that you can't keep up with it, and it's going to affect God's people. It's beginning to happen today. So now, let's talk about that. Last week we brought out the Pope, talking about the fundamentalists. They're a scourge, all right? So I'm going to bring in a slide in case you missed last program to tie it into what we're talking about today. This is last week. Pope Francis declared that Christian fundamentalists are a scourge. A scourge, right? This is the headline in the Reporter, which is a national Catholic newspaper, said the religious fundamentalist is a plague, the Pope says. Fundamentalist, in other words, if you maintain the faith once delivered, you're fundamentalist. You follow the scriptures, you obey what Christ said, you keep his commandments. Basically, you're a fundamentalist. You know, you're not left wing, you're not right wing. You haven't gone into all the areas that they run into that they're just on and on and on when you think about religion. But this is what he said. Beware of the fundamentalist groups. Everyone has his own. Even in Argentina, where he was delivering this, it says, there's little fundamentalist corners, even down there. Let us try with fraternity to go forward. In other words, all of us need to gather together, to band together, because everybody's got a fundamentalist group, some corner stuck away somewhere, said even here in Argentina. So let's all get together as a fraternity, and we want to stop this, right? We're not going to have these fundamentalist groups been interfering in our way of changing the culture for our nation and this world, right? That's what he's saying here. Really simple, really nice. We just got to be a bunch of banding together. We're just, we're going to be camaraderie in the spirit, and we're going to stop this, he says. Fundamentalism is a scourge, and all religions have some kind of a fundamentalist first cousin there, which forms a group. Can you believe that? I mean, this is coming from the Pope. We just got to love everybody. We're going to love everybody except the fundamentalists. And that's the thing about the LGBTQ, is that it's not enough for us to allow them to have what they want. You want to do that? Fine, go do that. Leave us alone. They can't do that because, you see, Satan has to target, because he knows the scriptures when God says, if not for the elect's sake, no flesh would be saved. So he knows that the last line of defense for him taking over and destroying this planet is God's people who are fundamentalists. Why? Because we have our foundation upon the scriptures, and that's where we come from. There's another word for fundamentalists and scourge. It's called the plague. In other words, the people who are fundamentalists, they're a plague on what we're trying to do. So he sees that, and he's telling everybody now in such a very nice way, when you see these little groups, they got corners somewhere, they got pockets, they form little organizations. By the way, they're also in church. Churches have these also. We need to target those fundamentalist groups and destroy. And why? Because they're a plague on society. In fact, these are probably the people and the reason why we have all of this climate problem, because these people will not adhere to what we're trying to change. And they're going to go after God's people. But right now, God's given us a little bit of protection. And we need to use that time to be able to advance the Word of God, to cry aloud and spare not, to warn this world of what's coming. So you can see how dangerous this is. So now, let's move on. All right, targeting the conservative Christian community. All right, now, I brought all this out for a reason, because now we're moving into where people say, well, I don't want to talk about politics, but you don't realize the politics is no longer just politics. Back in 2008, everything began to change, that the issues that the politics talk about are fundamentalist in its nature. In other words, everything that's changing in politics has a target, and that target is to go after the conservative Christian, the conservative movement, and that's where it's going. I'm going to show you something here that's going to shock you, and I'm going to bring in one of our timelines again to show you how different things are today and how they will be in the near future. Targeting the conservative Christian community. This is from Joe Biden talking about the anti-LGBT groups. Now, that doesn't mean that you join a society or you join a club. He's also tying in churches, just like the Pope tied in churches to conservative groups. He compares the anti-LGBT groups to very similar to being terrorist groups, right? Terrorist groups. Think about that. So now we just took out conservative, and I just put in what the Pope talked about, the fundamentalists, right? The fundamentalists, right? So let's go on. This is what he said. In my administration, and I've got a video I'm going to show you in just a second, it runs about 4 minutes long. In my administration, we had a provision. If I'm elected, I will. These are 3 things he said he's going to do. First and foremost, pass the Equality Act. Second, we're going to create a watchdog group to keep watch on the groups. What groups is he talking about? He's talking about the anti-LGBTQ groups. The same ones that the Pope's talking about is the conservatives. So in other words, what you do in your church and behind closed doors is not enough just to be by yourself and not bother anybody. They're going to begin targeting you. And he's saying in his administration, when he was in office, he had a group of people doing that. And if you don't believe he did, think back to the 2012 election and the Tea Party. They found out literally that the IRS had literally targeted the Tea Party groups to affect the outcome of the election. Why isn't anybody talking about that? No, they're not going to discuss that. But they proved it to be so. They found facts, and they actually fired a couple of people because of it. Nobody went to jail for anything corrupt. Of course not. Then he said 3 is we need to start early and acquaint our children very early. And this is what we've been noticing. And then you look around, you got the little LGBT groups, you got the transgenders, you have the queens running around in libraries. So let's play that video, and I'll be right back.
What will you do as president to help reduce violence and hate crimes against LGBTQ people and other marginalized communities?
Well, first of all, Judy, it's good to see you. It really is good to see you.
Thanks.
I don't want to ruin a reputation, but I consider Judy a friend. And
Thank you.
We've worked a lot.
Feelings mutual, sir.
That's right. Judy, I think that there are a whole range of things. First of all, think of what has happened between 2012 and 2016, the progress made, and what's happened just since 2016 and now. The president has pulled back almost every single solitary administratively positive thing we did, from the Affordable Care Act to Title IX to just across the board. And there's a number of things we have to do. First and foremost, I think we have to pass the Equality Act. That's important. That's important because it will change a whole range of things. And by the way, I suspect, Anders, you're going to hear this is going to be one forum where you're going to find very little disagreement among the Democratic candidates. I'm proud of the position they all have, because every one of us are. If there's differences, they're just in degree and emotional concern. Number one. Number two, what we had before to deal with hate crimes was we had a position in our administration within the Department of both Department of Justice as well as within Homeland Security. A provision to keep watch on these groups that we know are out there, like terrorist groups. They're similar. Know are out there, to be able to follow without violating their First Amendment rights, to be able to follow what they're doing and follow up on threats that come forward, because they come forward in many different fora. Number three, what we have to do is we have to make sure that we make this is a civil rights issue. It's covered by, in my view, even though the court may not agree, this is a civil rights issue, protected by civil rights, the Civil Rights Act. And we should be focusing on how to enforce that. My Justice Department, and I guess anyone in the Democrats' Justice Department, will in fact do that. Lastly, I think that it's really important that we start early. We start early and we begin to acquaint all our children. My son, Bo, who you knew, met, who died, my son started an organization to deal with children of abuse, bullying, and also those engaged in LGBTQ issues, particularly young people. And what he did was begin to try to educate the population about what's going on. Look, all of you, I'm not saying, you may not all be members of the community, but all of you understand that if the American people knew what was really going on, in my view, Anderson, things would be different. One of my arguments is that we don't, and when we talk about being able to get married on Sunday or Saturday and get fired on Monday, the vast majority of American people don't think that's possible. The vast majority of people don't know that that is possible. They know you can't be fired because you're African American, you can't be fired because you're this, that, or the other, but they don't know that. And one of the things I will do as President of the United States is constantly remind people of what the facts are. Because no, I really mean it. Because so many of you have taken extraordinary steps to make sure we moved as far as we have. And one of the things that people don't know, try it out. Try it out with some next time you're in a restaurant. You're sitting there and you're waited on, or you meet the maitre d' and say, by the way, let me ask you a question. Do you think if somebody got married on Monday, they get fired on Tuesday? They're going to look at you and tell you no. They don't know it. The American people are better than we give them credit for. But we allow the homophobes to be able to control the agenda because they let this. No, I really mean it. I really, truly mean it. Try it. Try it. People don't know it. And so I would constantly talk about and educate the public. Part of the responsibility of a president is to convince, is to persuade, is to be able to let people know what is actually going on out there.
Did you get the gist of that? In a very nice way. And he finally let some of his emotion out toward the end of that little 4.5-minute rant. That he's going to do, if he's elected, he's going to do everything in his power to encourage people, to point out, and to rally the people to go against the homophobes. Who are the homophobes? We're not a homophobe in our church because we believe in the basic foundations of God's holy word. We're not scared of them. But the point is, they're going to take away our rights to believe what we want to. God said at the end time it's going to be like Sodom, it'd be like Gomorrah. And had he not left us a remnant, we would all be that way. So these things are happening today. And God's church needs to be aware of that. And we need to be able to be prepared because the culture in our nation is changing. And is changing rapidly, all right, in direct contrast to these issues. Now, let me bring out what Donald Trump has brought in. Because in that little speech, he talked about from 2012 to 2016, he said they made great strides. Well, some of the strides was the illegal activity behind the scenes of targeting the Tea Party, preventing them from participating in their freedom of right to participate in elections if that's what they wanted to, labeling and targeting their group as they were involved with hate crimes, all the way to what's being brought out now in the reports that's followed the Mueller report that just came out from what's the department that brought about all the crimes that were being brought about? The Inspector General's report. I just drew a blank on that name for some reason. The Inspector General's report showing all the illegal activity that's taken place. All that took place from 2012 to 2016. Had not Donald Trump got elected, none of this would have been brought out. It would have been all be skirted under the rug, where God's holy word says justice cries out in the streets. Well, there was no justice going on. The leadership, it appears, of the legal bodies of the government agencies and law enforcement were all in it, what it appears to be, and we'll talk about it next year because now it's finally starting to come out. And we've been very quiet in this program about it because we don't want to talk about just politics, only things, the issues that involve God's holy word in relationship to how they affect us in the return of Jesus Christ. So now some of these things are finally coming out. So he talked about everything's been changed. Why? Because it's being brought back to put things back to a legal way to do things. So that's what we're looking at. So now, you just saw Biden say we're going to have a department. We're going to begin targeting. We're going to begin, and they're going to form a list of all these different groups that he equates to hate groups, terrorist groups, because you don't agree with LGBTQ. And he's going to have people riled up to go after those people. It is coming, and you need to get ready for it, whether you want to believe it and think, well, it can never happen in America. Well, I'm telling you, it can happen in America, and it's happening in America now, and it has happened. So now, let's show you the difference of what was going on with that election versus what's happening now. In 2017, the House Oversight Committee moves to eliminate the Johnson Amendment. The Johnson Amendment says that if you're a church, you cannot have anything to say or do about politicians or politics. Out the window, that's gone. The Law and Justice, this was issued, a document issued on September 23rd, 2019. This is 2 years later after getting into office. In that report, Trump was said he is committed to protecting religious freedom in the United States and around the world. I have said, and we have maintained in this program, the reason that God allowed him to get in that office had nothing to do with politics, basically had nothing to do with anything that Donald Trump of himself did, but for one reason and one reason only, to allow God's word to continue to warn this world of Jesus Christ's coming. Had it not happened, what we're about to see is going to happen down the road, what Joe Biden just said, and you just heard, they're going to begin targeting God, people, and the Pope's rallying all the conservatives to go after the conservatives, right? So let me back that up for just a second. I'm going to back it up. It says this: each one of us has the right to follow the dictates of our conscience and the demands of our religious conviction. All right, so now, do you see the difference? I get accused all the time of being a Republican or defending Republicans. No, it has nothing to do with that. And I'm hoping that this program will show you what I'm talking about. It has to do with our religious convictions and the differences of the way people act, think, and pass laws. This is in that same document. In 2017, President Trump signed the executive order to advance religious freedom, restoring the ideals that have undergirded our nation since its foundation. What did Joe Biden just say? In the last 4 years, since 2012, he has reversed everything we put in place. What is Donald Trump doing? He's restoring the foundation to give us the freedom of the founders of this nation. The next thing is to ensure American organizations are not forced to violate their religious and moral beliefs by complying with the Obamacare's contraceptive mandate. In the past, if a person says, I don't believe in it, it's against my religion, they got fired. Now, he didn't mention that in his speech. Of course, he mentioned the LGBTQ, but you could go to work this morning and be forced, a nurse or someone saying, you need to issue this, and they would say, the doctor, the nurse, no, I'm not. Well, you're fired. How about that? Nobody mentions that. It's always the other side around. And how about this one? The administration finalized a rule providing more flexibility for federal employees whose religious beliefs require them to abstain from work on certain days. This is critical for you and I. Whether you realize what that says or not, that means that they have reinstated the law that says that if you want to keep your Feast of Tabernacles, your Day of Atonement, your trumpets, Passover, unleavened bread, and Pentecost, you can't be fired for it. That was leaving the law. And Donald Trump's making sure that it stays in there. It absolutely stays in there. You ever wonder why he's been tied into Israel and the Jews? Because it's the same days. We're brothers. We keep the same laws that God set and established from the beginning. All right, so let's pull us in again. And now I'm going to begin to move to the next phase of what's taking place. This is what he said before. This is from Joe Biden. In my administration, we had a provision. In other words, we had a department. All right, we were recognizing. He says, if I'm elected, I will create a watchdog group to keep watch on the groups. So now let's compare the two, side by side. You decide, and you'll see it's nothing to do with Republican or Democrat. It's the mindset of what people are doing and saying. It's talking about the issues of life, what's right, what's wrong. It's not about politics. And I hope that I can get our people to understand that we need to be aware of these things. And just because you take a stance, because politically it happens to follow the same path of God's word, it doesn't make you a politician or a Republican. It's founding the scriptures that God gave us and maintaining them. This is what Donald Trump said. Established a new conscience and religious freedom division to protect religious freedom. On this side, if he's elected, he's going to have a watchdog group to stop you from believing what you want to believe. On this side, he's saying, I'm going to have a division to protect you to believe what you want to believe. Now, you tell me, who would you pick? All right? It gets pretty clear when you isolate what he's saying. These are the issues of what's going on right now. Everything that's issues or topics in government today, they're biblically based because we're getting close to the end. And it has to target God's elect. So now, let's put it in one more perspective. I've been running these timelines. Remember all these timelines? There's a reason for it. They're telling us a story. Let's put the timeline together now, in case you haven't been following week by week or year by year, basically. A former and a latter, a physical and a spiritual in God's plan. We talked about in 29 how Hitler took power and control and how he began to change Germany, right? We all know that. But did you realize that in 2015 when the law changed to allow gay marriage, you began to change America? The void of evil, satanic, came in at the same time. Physical, spiritual. All right, so he began in 1929 and 31. There's the parts who rise. Same way in America, the LGBT began to change. You didn't find an LGBTQ, but now it changed. Why? Because they bring in all the other changes in America into those acronyms. Pretty soon they just want to bring the alphabet to have everything. Just a couple years later, Hitler takes control and he begins to attack the Jewish people. God's warning that Satan is beginning to attack, I believe, and I think time will prove out, is beginning to show even now that this is a warning that God gave to his people in his church. By 1938, Kristallnacht advanced the movement of the attacks on the Jewish people. 7 years later in America, 1924, tells us we're going to be decimated financially by that time. I think it's going to be sooner because things are moving so much faster. They just keep passing laws that we're over $1 trillion deficit every single year now. And nobody's talking about that. Why? Because the economy is booming. But I'm going to tell you, it's on surface boom because the debt continues to grow, and it will be one of our demises. So you have the physical, you have the spiritual. What else is going to take place at that time? There's an election coming. 7 years of plenty. 7 years of plenty. How about this? This is the time that they're talking about the end of the world, 2030 to 2031, and God warns of 7 years of lean, just like in the Old Testament with the children of Israel, and they warned Joseph and Pharaoh. Are we going to see from this period of time, 2024, in that election, the beginning of 7 years of lean, to bring about the punishment of God's word? Now you see why we want to have Chuck to be able to come in to separate the events, because they're going to tell you it's climate change bringing it, and we're going to tell you the truth. It's God's laws that are bringing about the punishment on man for what he did. All right, so then, of course, Hitler leaves. Satan knows he has but a short time. Are we looking at the potential of the return of Jesus Christ in the 20s? I don't know. I think there's a real good chance. But we don't know the day or the hour. But one thing God's given us, he says you can look at what he did do, and he'll tell us what we will do. You look here and you look here. I've never seen anything lined up like this in my life. And I've been in the church since 1971. So now, let's take this now and let's see. Hitler went after the Jews, right? So at the end time, who's Satan going after? The elect. This alignment here is Revelation chapter 12 to the T, to the T. And that's a warning from the heavens that says, hey, listen, God's going to begin to do something, and I think he's beginning to bring about his plan. So now I took everything out, the clutter out, all right? Now let's add something new that we haven't put into the timeline. If you notice, you go back over our timelines, I never change the dates, and I never have to change the movements, only the events that happens. As God reveals things, we add them to the story. So what are we looking at? We have a 2020 election coming. We have the creator of the Watchdog Group. If you're like me, we're going to go after those conservatives, those Christians, and we're going to go after those who don't agree with LGBTQ. Donald Trump says he's going to come in, he's going to protect the Christian rights. Now, I have said now for the last few months, I think Donald Trump's already in. I think it's in God's plan. Why would I say that? When I look at the parallel alignments of what's going on, it's like it's as if he put him in to give us 7 years of plenty. Have you ever seen the economy growing like it's growing right now? I ask our staff, have you ever seen anything like this? I think God's showing us this is detrimental, what's coming, but you got some time. Get your act together. Get your relationship to God Almighty, to Jesus Christ. Put your finances in order. Get your house together and prepare, because devastation is coming. We can see it lining up, and we knew it lined up physically there. It's lining up spiritually right here. So that's the 2020 election, and I believe Donald Trump will be in only for this reason. I don't know. But if I look at what's lined up, this is what appears to happen, right? However, let's suppose he doesn't. Everything that you're looking lining up right now moves up 4 years, because those plans that they have, he said everybody, all the candidates, the Democratic candidates, all agree to this. They're going to do the same thing. God says he will let us know, and I believe that he will. God also has a scripture, says that he will cut time short. Maybe God will have mercy, and if that happens, it's only because God's had mercy he's cutting time short. But at this time, unless something changes, I believe Donald Trump is in already according to God's plan. Now that brings us to what? The 2024 election. I don't think we'll see another Republican after this term. I just don't think that'll happen, according to what we're looking at here. So if the election comes next time, and I don't know who they'd even run on the Republican side, who's strong enough to stop, because God says at the end time, the women and the gay and the children are going to rule them. All the policies of the left right now are pointing to that. I think they'll be ready for it. When they come in, they will bring in the Pope's 2030 agenda. They will begin to change everything to focus on climate change and all these hate groups, the homophobes. And that's why I think these things are going to happen here, not next year. You know, I wanted to bring that out because you see, when you look at these things in perspective of what God, you see what's taking place. That ought to wake everybody up. By the way, take that section and share that with people in the church that you know. Let them take a look at this. I mean, I think that's the clearest picture I've had so far of showing you the difference between left and right, not Republican, Democrat, versus God's people being right in the middle. And I believe if you do that and you share that with them, say, listen, I just got to share you something. Just take that one section. Can't be more than 15 minutes on that one section and show it to them. That's got to wake up people's eyes to understand what's coming. And I believe that's part of what God's given us in this program, is to be a warning witness to help God's churches be prepared for what's coming. All right, when we come back, we're going to talk about that song that you've heard all your life, We Three Kings. But before we do, I'm going to bring up Hanukkah. And this is from the Maccabees. Do we have the Maccabees in there? There they are, the Maccabees, before we come back. And then uplifting a little story. We want to share this for our friends and our brothers in the Jewish faith who are keeping their Hanukkah right now, and wish them well. But take a listen to this upbeat little story, and I'll be right back.
I'll tell a tale, yeah. Of Maccabees in Israel, yeah. When the Greeks tried to sail, yeah. But it was all to no avail, yeah. The war went on and on and on, until the mighty Greeks were gone. sometimes, saying, hey, oh, spin the dreidel. Just wanna celebrate for all 8 nights, singing, hey, oh, light the candle. We say Alhamdulillah, oh yeah, for all 8 nights. Then we play dreidel by the candlelight. And I told you once, now I told you twice, about the miracle of the candlelight. They took the field. Their rivals thought, are they for real? Those Maccabees, they never yield. They charged ahead with sword and shield. Yeah, the war went on and on and on, until the mighty Greeks were gone. Yeah, up in my lockers in the air sometimes, saying, hey, oh, spin the dreidel. Just wanna celebrate for all 8 nights, singing, hey, oh, light the candle. We say ma'otul, oh yeah, for all 8 nights. Then we play dreidel by the candlelight. And I told you once, now I told you twice, about the miracle of the candlelight. And the great menorah, for 8 days it kept on burning. What a celebration, a great return to Torah learning. 'Cause I can feel it, and Nes Gadol, Nes Gadol, Nes Gadol Hayasham, Nes Gadol Hayasham, Nes Gadol Hayasham, sham, sham, sham. Up in my lockers in the air sometimes, saying, hey, oh, spin the dreidel. Just wanna celebrate for all 8 nights, singing, hey, oh, light the candle. We say ma'otul, oh yeah, for all 8 nights. Then we play dreidel by the candlelight. And I told you once, now I told you twice, about the miracle of the candlelight.
What a great little story. I mean, I love that. They look like they had a lot of fun with that story, sharing that with everybody, and the music, putting together. And I know we played it before, but I thought it was appropriate to share that with you today. So hope you enjoy it. Hanukkah by the Maccabees. Okay, let's get into our Nuggets portion of the program with the song We Three Kings, talking about the Magi. So in all honesty, this got by me in doing our programming and actually in my sermons. You get involved, you become focused, you're laser focused on what you're doing. But last week I received a phone call from a friend of mine, and he said, you know, Tom, and he began asking me about the We Three Kings. He said, you think maybe that has something to do with the stars? We've been talking about the stars and the star alignment. And as soon as he said it, boom, something went off in my head. I said, yes, I didn't even catch that. So I want to share that with you, another little piece of the puzzle that God had, and how Satan hides things, and how God lets you want to believe a lie, you believe a lie, and they don't realize what's going on. This is in Matthew 2, it talks about the wise men. Remember the song We Three Kings of Orient Are? And this is the words of the song. I'm not going to read the whole song, but it says, we three kings of Orient are, bearing gifts we traverse so far, field and mountain, moor and mountain, following yonder star. Sound familiar? All right. He goes on, O store of wonder, store of night, store with royal beauty bright, westward leading, still proceeding, guide us to thy perfect light. In other words, the perfect light is actually Jesus Christ. So what's interesting about this is Matthew doesn't give us 3 wise men. It really has nothing to do with wise men. But it's interesting how the world now focuses on what the 3 wise men upon a scripture about gold, frankincense, and myrrh. But by doing that, it has taken the eyes of the world off where God says to go look. That's what I missed at for this story. So now let's read a couple of verses. So now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, saying, where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east, and we are come to worship him. So now, just a little bit of story. So what in the world are we looking at? They saw his star, right? All right, the biblical magi is also referred to as the three wise men or the three kings, as the song says. In the gospel account of Matthew, the Christian tradition distinguished the foreigners who visit Jesus after his birth, bearing gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So you think it's a neat little giddy, a little nice little song, and they talk about three kings because it mentions three specific gifts, assuming that each king brought a different gift. And it makes sense, and when you listen to it and you hear the story, it all makes sense. But what's not being told from this story, all right? We began actually talking about it in the prophetic alignment of the stars, and we actually went even further than back, talking about the mouth of two witnesses, begin talking about the star alignment. Now remember, they said we followed his star. What were they looking at? They were looking at something in heaven. The wise men. Now, the churches convince people today you don't look at stars, that's pagan. And we have done that over and over and shared with you how that's not. This is what God's work says. And God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs, the very first thing he put them there for, and for seasons, for days, and for years. And one of the interesting things God tells us, if you want to know what I'm going to do, go look at what I did. He also says in his holy word, I'm telling you the end from the beginning. So the only thing left that we can see from the beginning of the creation when God set it in place, the sun, the moon, and the stars. All right, nothing else that man has ever lasted. So if we want to know, the wise men knew, so that means there's information that we don't have today that God allowed them to understand back then. One of them was they looked at the stars. Now this is our star alignment. I'm not going to go through everything in it. But if you're new and you hadn't seen all these things, pay attention to what it says in Revelation 12. There appeared a sign in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun. All right, so now put a box around her. You see it on her shoulder, clothed in the sun, with the moon under her feet. So way down at the bottom of the screen, you see the moon at her feet. And on her head, a garland of 12 stars. So here you have Leo, which is known as the king constellation, is one. 2, and I'm just going to go through real quick with all the stars because we've gone through it before, and you'll see all these stars line up. You have, see the Venus is, if you leave that up on the screen, Jeff, Venus is under that circle, but it's actually talking about the orb right below it because number 9 is actually the 9th star. Leo has 9 stars and 3 what they call roving stars, which are the planets. 3 roving planets. One is Venus, Mars, and Mercury. So now we have on her head the garland of 12 stars, which is the king Leo, the king constellation, on her head. Then being with child, and with child right there is the womb of what we're talking about, is Jupiter. All right, so I've got this showing that Jupiter came out of the womb on the date of September 23rd, 2017. So what are we looking at here? All right, so this is the time in the season that shows us Revelation 12. And it looks like, it, according to our timeline, something's going on with these stars. And was God telling us a story? Well, we could go look at if he's told us a story in the past. This alignment only occurs 4 times in little variances, but they all have the 12 garland. They all have the same alignments with a little bit of movement with the planets moving into it. The first time we can find this from NASA is 586 BC, was the time of the fall of the first temple in the Old Testament. All right? So you go through, you find them all here. I won't do that with each one, but I just wanted to show you. There's Mars, you have Saturn, and Mercury. See, Venus is not here, but it still has 3 revolving planets, right? The stars. There's the sun on her shoulder, there's the moon at her feet. The second time we find it is 70 AD, which is the fall of the temple in the New Testament. So we see these alignments all taking place during the period of warnings and time of the fall of the temples. All right, these are gods. The other times we find out, this is going to amaze you what we see here. the 3 BC. All right, don't forget you have to add a year. So when you put all these things together, you get all these alignments. There's two things happening here. This is the only time this alignment occurs with these things that are taking place together. The alignment of the stars, they're all there, but you also have the alignment of the kings. There's Leo, the king constellation, Jupiter, let me back it up. I didn't put a box around him, but you have Jupiter and you have Regulus, the king star. So when you see the story, is it possible to make sure that Satan doesn't want us to look at the stars? When it says, we 3 kings of Orientar, maybe he's getting you to look on the earth where God says these 3 kings are in alignment and they're bringing the Son of God. Amazing when you think about it, because that's the day he was begotten, the time he was begotten on the earth, and the beginning of his ministry, his first half of his ministry. So I saw it, I said, wow, that's pretty wild when you see all this going on here. All right, so now, that's it for our program. We're at the end of it. So now let's bring from the home office what we have. You know, I hope you found that interesting. I did, because it's just something I didn't quite understand before. Our sermon online, in case you missed it, it's still there. You need to go watch this. It's called The Day of December 25th, the Day of the Invincible Sun. And you can go find it online on the homepage. And I also recommend that there's actually 3 videos that are in companionship talking about Satan's plan of his destruction, which is December 25th, Mardi Gras, and Easter. 3 of Satan's holy days for him, which are holidays for this nation. All right, so they're all available online. In the mail this week, Least in the Kingdom Part 3, if you haven't seen them all yet. And At Dawn We Slept, which was just offered in the December core. It's a powerful story comparing what took place in Pearl Harbor with God's people with the return of Jesus Christ, showing us God's church asleep at the return of Jesus Christ. This is something I'm really excited about. I know my brother's been working very hard putting all these together now. All of these are together now. Almost 5 years, over 50 hours of Bible study timeline pieces put together with the culture of America with the timelines. It's a 4-page brochure. It's going to be in the quarterly going out at the end of this month, which you're going to have in just a couple weeks. That's the front page. And when you open it up, what you will find is the pictures of each of the sermon series that we have been delivering for almost 5 years. And it tells you a little bit how to do it. On the bottom, I ran a timeline of when the series, basically, and the time and the year that they were given. So we recommend you use this now as a Bible study tool. Just take 1 sermon a week. Get your notebook, get your 3-ring binder, make your notes, go through these studies as they were delivered in sermons, but in a study fashion, and use this to your advantage. And you need to start at the beginning, and you need to walk it through. And if you take your time and you do it, it's going to open your mind to things you never understood before. God will work with you personally. It's between you and Jesus Christ, and He will open your mind to understand. And you will see why we say what we do and where God's been taking us. It is one of the most fascinating studies and series I've ever put together, and I've never seen something like this, to put this much together, because as God was helping us to understand what was going on, just like I brought you today between Biden and Trump, that wasn't available to put that together a month ago. So each step of the way, God's walking us through. And you know why? Because God says He's not going to do anything until He reveals His secret to His servants first. And that's what's important about this. Then in the back cover, it talks about the conditions in America that were delivered in that same 5-year period, talking about as conditions to the timeline changed, the conditions in America deteriorated. But we have it all together. You can have it in a pull-out section out of your quarterly, keep it together, put it in a notebook, and put your mind to work in God's holy word. You got a lot of information here, a lot of information. Next week, we have another guest coming in, Chuck Baker out of Florida. This is our week for Chucks. I guess we could do that woodchuck. If a woodchuck would. I'm not going to do that to him. But I just did, so anyway, let me move on. All righty, that's it for our program today. As always, I'm going to close the program with a little video that we like to bring you an uplifting video and to encourage you and uplift you for the week. This year, since we're at the end of the year, this is the end of man's year, not God's year, but it is the end of the year. We're going to bring you a video called The New Year unchanged. Take a look. I'll be right back. Welcome back. Well, that's it for our program. We want to thank Chuck Hunt and Karen and their family for being with us. And by the way, I didn't think to bring this out earlier. They're leaving here. As you know, we tape early during the week, and they're heading up to the Winter Festival. I didn't mention it in the program because the time this came out, we're almost finished the Winter Festival. But if you're up there and you get this early enough, they will be there next weekend. Stop by the booth. They're going to be at the Winter Festival in Lexington, Kentucky with Jim O'Brien and their group at the Family Winter Vacation time, they call it. Whatever his name is. Stop by and say hello. He's going to be bringing that brochure I just showed you and trying to share with everybody. So if you get this program and you're at that family weekend, stop by and say hello. And on behalf of all of us here at God's Unchanging Word, thanks again for watching. And don't forget, share this story with everybody. They're going to love you for it. Oh, no. Until next week, God be with you in God's Unchanging Word.